Hello and thank you for downloading the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service with me, Rachel Naylor. I'm going to tell you the story of the man who lived in an airport for 18 years. I've been speaking to his biographer. It's the 8th of August 1988 and 42-year-old Mehran Karimi Naziri has arrived at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris.
He was intending to change planes to get a plane to London. He wanted to go and live in the United Kingdom. He wasn't allowed to board. Regulations had changed in some way where you needed a valid passport to get on a plane, and he became trapped in France.
That's Andrew Donkin, who helped write Mehran's life story, The Terminal Man.
He didn't want to leave the airport because he'd been arrested a couple of times and sent to prison in France because he didn't have the right papers to be there, and he really didn't want to go back there. And he found that the airport was the one place he could stay in France. It's a kind of diplomatic no man's land. You don't need French papers to be able to stay there. I think there was a little bit of him that thought, well, if I plonk myself down on an airport bench and wait a couple of days, somebody will say, okay, oh, go on then, you can go through. I think he thought, if I stay here for a little bit in a kind of silent protest, I will eventually get what I want and be allowed to go to the UK.
But Mehran was wrong, and he ended up staying in the airport for 18 years, until 2006. Andrew, an author, became aware of Mehran's story in 2004.
The phone went and a voice said, could you be in Charles de Gaulle Airport by 3 or 4 o'clock today? We have someone, we're very interested in you working with them on their autobiography. And I had to leave kind of almost immediately, about half an hour later.
And what was your first impression of him?
He is a very dignified man. In many ways, he had a very tough life. He was living in the middle of an airport where it's busy all of the time, it's noisy all of the time. You have announcements that go on about 20 hours a day. There's lots of pollution. There's obviously the dangers of passers-by nicking stuff. And even so, he was very respectful of people. He was very interested in the world. He was always really interested in current affairs. And he came over as very intelligent. He always had a real bright spark of intelligence in his eyes that were really keenly listening to whoever he was talking to. I liked him. I think we got on very well from the very first time that I met him.
Mehran told the BBC he liked to be known by another name.
My name, Mehran, is different in French and English, but more easy to call me Alfred or Sir Alfred.
He wrote to the British Embassy asking for citizenship, and somebody there wrote back to him. They obviously meant to say, Dear Sir, or Dear Alfred, and what they actually typed was Dear Sir Alfred.
So Mehran would jokingly say that the UK hadn't offered him citizenship, but they had given him a knighthood. Andrew spent 2.5 weeks in the airport, interviewing Mehran for up to 8 hours a day, teasing his story out.
If I asked him a direct question, what happened to you in Berlin in 1984, he would mostly say, oh, nothing happened, I can't remember. But when you were speaking about current events, he would often then remember an anecdote about his time in Berlin. And so it was a matter of having daily long conversations with him, during which he would remember things and during which memories would come out, and then coming away with a huge mosaic.
And what was his typical day? How did he spend his time?
He would wake up every morning when the announcement started, and he would immediately go to the washroom because he wanted to get there before anybody else is really in there. He would pop at breakfast time and get a breakfast meal from McDonald's usually, and the same at lunchtime and the same at tea time. He liked his filet-o-fish. That was something I worked out that he must have eaten about 8,000 in the time that he was there. He was quite a creature of habit.
How did he afford to stay there?
He would survive by being given meal vouchers from airport workers. They always had loads of spare vouchers, and they very kindly used to give those to Sir Alfred when they passed his bench.
And Mehran filled the rest of his day writing in his diary.
The airport doctor gave Alfred a packet of blank A4 paper, and Sir Alfred used this for his journal. And every day he would probably write about 20 pages. He would write about what he had to eat. He would write about who had talked to him in the airport. He would write a lot about current affairs. That took a lot of time. The rest of the time he spent reading. He was really interested in history and political figures.
Speaking to the BBC in 1994, Mehran admitted living in the airport had its ups and downs.
In my experience, life here in the Charles de Gaulle Airport is not bad. I try to have a nice day every day. In just 6 years, normally I have been alone and not too happy. I hope the result will be a happy end.
Mehran was born in Iran in 1945. He later spent time living in Belgium and France, but he wanted to move to the UK in search of his estranged British mother. It's not clear how he ended up without a passport. Some say Mehran left Iran willingly. Some say he burned his Iranian ID papers. Some say he was expelled. After 11 years of waiting and fighting his case, in 1999 he was granted refugee status and the right to remain in France. But Mehran didn't want to remain in France. He felt he'd been treated badly there and was holding out for citizenship in the UK.
I think nobody can live 11 years in such a situation. 2, 3, 4 governments and some appeals granted, some appeal refused. But in this situation, I'm unique in immigration case.
Mehran became famous in the airport, and his story attracted international media attention.
In the bustling departure lounge of Paris Airport, Mehran Karimi Nasseri has been waiting 6 years for a flight out. Alfred, as he likes to be known, arrived without a passport in 1988 and disappeared into a bizarre bureaucratic black hole. France says he has no right to stay.
He even inspired a Hollywood film, Steven Spielberg's The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks in 2004, for which Mehran reportedly received $275,000. Thanks to his newfound fame, he received countless letters from well-wishers.
I think his story touched people because, first, it was very unusual. Secondly, it was a little bit like the story where Paddington Bear is found at Paddington Station. He was there, he was alone, he's a nice guy, he's a little bit lost in the world. And I think because of the mystery and kind of the enigma around him, you could read into it what you wanted. Some people thought that he was very lucky to be in the airport and, he had no family responsibilities and no mortgages or anything. Oh, wouldn't that be great? Other people felt very sorry for him because his life was a bit of a mystery as to how he had suddenly popped up there.
Andrew's book came out in September 2004, and he returned to the airport to bring Mehran a copy.
I remember quite nervously thinking, oh gosh, I really hope he likes it. And when I saw him, his face broke into a broad smile and he said, Andrew! I said, oh, Sir Alfred, I've got copies of the book. And he said, it is a triumph. And I said, well, you haven't read it yet, Sir Alfred. And he said, no, I have. And his friendly, enterprising guy running the newsagent about 100 feet from his bench had got in about 100 copies of the book, and he was selling them to holidaymakers and passengers, and they were going over to Sir Alfred and getting him to sign it.
In 2006, Mehran left his home, the Red Bench in the departures lounge of Terminal 1, between the newsagents and the bye-bye bar, when he was hospitalised for a few months with a bad chest infection. After that, Mehran wasn't allowed back into the airport, and his belongings were moved to a homeless shelter in District 20 of Paris. But he did return in 2022. He died a few weeks later in the airport on the 12th of November of natural causes. He was 76.
He was a unique guy in a unique position, and he witnessed history from a unique way of sitting on his bench. He left a lasting impression on me of grace and dignity under fire and how to keep your intellect bright and alive when you're really in an environment that doesn't allow you to do that or doesn't give you much freedom. And I liked him very much. I was very, very fond of him.
Andrew Donkin was speaking to me, Rachel Naylor, for that episode of the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service. If you enjoy our podcast, why not leave us a review?